welcome to the 9th episode of the Nicole Pearson Show. I am, as always, so excited to have our next guest on. She is an accomplished and very well-respected and known attorney and advocate for individual liberties, and one of currently the country's foremost legal authorities on the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. She spent the first half of her career as an appellate public defender, but during the COVID era, as many of us did, or not many of us, but some of us did, pivoted her practice to stand in the gap for us as American citizens to thwart and defeat, actually, government overreach and the steady erosion of our constitutional rights by not just the government, governmental entities, but private actors emboldened by the government. This woman's name is Jenin Younes. She is one of the lead litigation attorneys at the new Civil Liberties Alliance. She's incredible. She's out of New York, and we are so blessed to have her today. Welcome to the show, Jenin. How are you? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, how are you? I know it's a little bit later over there, and I know you are so busy, so we really, really appreciate you coming on the show. And I know you're such a busy woman. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Just one small correction. I'm actually in DC, not New York. I used to.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, well, even better. You got to be in the lion's den, in the belly of the beast. So that makes sense.
Not fun, but
yeah. So, I was just, your bio is incredible. And we talked earlier, and you actually saw what I had written. I was reading it. I'm like, this is going to take me like 6 minutes just to read her bio and all of her accomplishments, everything that you have done. But I thought, obviously, it'd be better just to come for you to describe or share with us how you got to where you are today, which is fighting in the Supreme Court, suing the White House, suing the current president of the United States, fighting for the U.S. Constitution. Can you share with our viewers and listeners how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I was a public defender in New York. I started that job in about 2012. And then when COVID hit, I was one of the few people sort of in the left-leaning world who opposed the lockdowns and related mandates. I really thought that they were civil liberties violative. I also predicted that they would have negative impacts, mostly on the working class, the poor. Being a public defender in New York, like I saw the way a lot of poor people live. They have 8 people to a 1-bedroom apartment and one laptop, or if any. And I'm like, well, these kids aren't going to be able to do school from home. That's for rich kids. So I was a huge opponent. I also started doing a lot of research into epidemiology because I had a lot of time on my hands since everything was shut down.
Yeah.
So, and I came across a lot of the scientists you're probably familiar with, like Martin Kulldorff, Jay Bhattacharya, Sunetra Gupta. And I became convinced this was a huge mistake pretty quickly, and just increasingly frustrated as people on the left wouldn't listen. So, I'd sort of try to talk to friends and family and say, like, well, I've been reading this stuff and they seem to suggest lockdowns aren't such a good idea. And maybe we should be looking at other approaches. Look at what Sweden's doing. And people weren't even willing to have a dialogue. It was just like, you want grandma to die and you're a terrible person and you're not willing to make sacrifices. And that's why you think this. And I got very frustrated, and I started to write for the American Institute of Economic Research, which was sort of one of the leading anti-lockdown voices in the country. They're actually anarcho-capitalist, so really quite far from me politically, but we agreed on this one issue. And in September of 2020, the editorial director, Jeffrey Tucker, invited me to a sort of get together of like-minded people, including Kulldorff. And then a couple of weeks later invited me to come back. And that was when the Great Barrington Declaration sort of spontaneously was written. So I got to be there for that, which was fun.
That's wild.
Yeah. And then during this time, I created a Twitter account and it was anonymous for a long time. It was like Lefty Lockdown Skeptic was the name. And then at some few months later, I decided to just come out in my name. And then that was when people at work started to find what I was saying. They didn't like it, to say the least. And I decided, I was also just spending a lot of my free time working on this anti-lockdown stuff and trying to work a job. And I was like, it'd be great if my job was doing this anti-mandate stuff. So Jeffrey Tucker at AIER actually told me about this place, the new Civil Liberties Alliance. They'd been fighting lockdowns. So I applied, got the job, moved to DC from New York, and started doing anti-mandate litigation, vaccine mandate litigation, and slowly started to learn about how the government had been involved in censorship of so-called vaccine misinformation. And that led me to what I've been doing currently.
Well, that's the perfect story. I mean, like you were just mentioning, to get paid for this work, right? There were not that many attorneys such as yourself or myself or Robert Tyler, Scott Street, that were willing to do the work. I mean, number one, they were scared. Number two, this is really new territory.
Yeah.
Even though the Constitution has been around for a long time, we've never had national, nationwide lockdowns. This is truly unprecedented. And so I don't know if you experienced this, but when you decided to embark on this journey, were people telling you, like, you're never going to win, don't do it, do something else? Were people encouraging you or discouraging you?
It depends. It was dependent on where they came from. But yeah, I think a lot of people thought, even who agreed with me philosophically, thought we weren't going to win. And there was a concern, which to some extent has come to fruition, that in an emergency, courts are not going to be very willing to question the government, the other branches of government. And so then you kind of can end up creating bad law. And there's some extent to which that's true. Like, I think if we had challenged vaccine mandates now, we might have been able to win. But most of the cases where we challenged local or state mandates, we ended up losing because the courts were sort of fine. This was in the state's 10th Amendment police power.
Right. What's your, I can talk about that all day long, because as I mentioned, we litigate in the state courts and we try to focus on local control, hyper local control, because hopefully people understand by now, you number one, have the most impact in your local areas, whether it's on elected representatives and boards of supervisors, city councils, and then also you can vote them out, replace someone, and again, in that locality you have more of a familiarity with the process, with the individuals involved, and then can hold them accountable without having to fly to DC, for example. But also, and you're working in the federal courts, the state courts, like you said, they have that 10th Amendment power. But even separate and apart from that, the courts were unwilling, and they continue to be unwilling to take a hard line on these issues. We did writ petitions, which are very specific. We didn't even ask ever, to end the local emergencies, for example. We just always ask the court to clarify or confirm our understanding of the law, of the black letter law. So we would do these writ petitions asking the courts for them to be honest and just read the code sections, for example, read the Constitution. Even we had a hard time with that. So we actually won, but then to get that final ruling, we've been mooted, as you know. You wrote an article about that, how courts are circumventing actually giving us final rulings that we can use in the future with this mootness doctrine. Have you been experiencing that in federal court as well?
Yeah. So for the second time, we had a case. No, sorry, the first one actually wasn't mooted. The court found it wasn't moot, but we lost this. So this was the first one. But there have been a lot of cases where that happens. So essentially, the vaccine mandates being challenged, or the mask mandate, and by the time, the process is slow. You file the complaint, a preliminary injunction motion. By the time you get a decision, it's 4 months. We've done away with the mask mandates. It's the summer. And then the court finds it's moot. The case is moot because it's not happening anymore. And then lo and behold, it's December, and we're going to bring back the mask mandate because you never got a ruling saying this is unconstitutional. So in this case, we had obtained a preliminary injunction against California's AB 28. That was the medical misinformation law that punished doctors for giving misinformation to patients about COVID. And misinformation was defined very broadly as anything that departs from the scientific consensus.
And what was that? We didn't even know what that was, because it was changing every day.
Exactly. And we won on that theory that it was vague. The court didn't actually address the First Amendment viewpoint discrimination concern. But so we got the preliminary injunction, but then another case had lost in the district court and went up on appeal to the Ninth Circuit. The panel was very hostile, and I think the government knew they were going to lose, and so the legislature repealed AB 2098, I think, to avoid creating bad precedent. So they argued in both cases that the case was moot, and the judges found in both cases that it was moot. So they didn't have to sort of reach a final ruling on the merits, which allows the government to dodge to dodge a bad ruling that would create actual precedent.
And I remember because we actually held a press conference at the Capitol, myself, Lee Dundas, Steve Kerr, Tara Thornton, Denise Aguilar, there are a ton of us, Children's Health Defense, PERC, Protection of Educational Rights, a lot of organizations here in California. We held a press conference up at the Capitol to, support your guys' efforts and to encourage, bring light to the issue, Evan Lowe's at AB 2098, and encourage people to contact their reps before it passed. And then I remember reading, they just literally flipped it into a subsequent bill. Like it was like the sixth paragraph in this completely unrelated bill. Yeah. The reason why I mentioned that is, as a lawyer, we want that final ruling. We want that piece of paper so that, like you just said, when the lockdowns come back, when the mask mandates come back again, we have some authority to rely upon. What do you tell your clients, or what can you tell viewers and listeners, when we see these games happening and the government literally doing these gymnastics and bending over backwards to avoid those final rulings? What can we do so that we can actually have some sort of rule of law established again or preserved?
I mean, the best thing is probably legislation. You're probably unlikely to get it in a place like California, but actually prohibiting, and some states have done it, especially I would say Florida, prohibiting, saying, we will not have mask mandate. You're not allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of vaccination status, or you're not allowed to require people to wear face coverings or whatever. I think that's probably the safest way to go, because the courts have just proven they're not protective. There are probably good courts in like Texas and Florida aren't where the mandates are, so.
That's exactly what I was about to say. These cases aren't happening there because we have the legislators, the representatives that are actually advocating for, and, even if they don't agree, but they're advocating for and representing their constituents, right? Yeah. So it's kind of, talk about moot. It's a moot point in those more conservative states. It's been very, I tell people, our facts, law, truth, justice followers and our clients, I say, the law is on our side. It's there. I wouldn't be doing the work if I didn't think that, we were right, that we needed to do the work. But I also tell them, litigation is the last resort. If you are calling me, it's because all of these other opportunities to, step into the fray and advocate for yourselves or for your children or for your businesses or whatever the case may be, either, you didn't try or it didn't work. So we're always trying to emphasize, educate and empower people to try and stave off the need to file a lawsuit, because again, in the state courts, we have not, and it's actually, I will say one thing. In the beginning, we were getting great rulings. We got a great ruling. Yeah, we did get in our one case, for example, Peggy Hall and Children's Health Defense, Bobby Kennedy's organization. We sued Orange County about the local emergencies, that they were not having public meetings to review local conditions. And they said, we're in a state of emergency. We can't have these meetings every 30 or 60 days. All these things. And we got a judge right out the gate that said, no, maybe they don't have to be every 30 or 60 days, but you have to have public meetings, due process of law. You have to give people notice and an opportunity to be heard if you're going to hold them in a state of emergency, suspend or infringe upon their rights, and impact or impair their ability to go to school, to work, to travel, to receive medical care. And that judge was removed from our case. And then we were bounced to 4 other judges. And no one wanted to, no other judge, I'm talking one, didn't even hear us, kicked us to another judge. The second judge came out to our first hearing and retired. So, and then the last judge is completely compromised, and he has let the government, basically the county and their attorneys, lie and kick the case down the road and continue it so long until the California emergency ended by Gavin Newsom declaring an end to the statewide emergency. So I think that they're there, the judges are there, but if you get them, you lose them very quickly. So, I mean, that's certainly what's happening. I do agree with you that we have to be more engaged in working with our elected representatives and working on legislation. Do you think that, you know, you were saying you're self-admitted, you know, you're saying more left-leaning a bit ago, but do you think that the tides have turned, that the climate has changed, and that even Democrats, for example, are more left-leaning or liberal, whatever that means anymore, people are now more awake to what's going on and willing to step into the fray to stop these kinds of, you know, this kind of government overreach? Or are they still, you know, either not aware of what's going on or unwilling to participate?
That's an interesting question. So first of all, I sort of say I'm left-leaning. I mean, I'm kind of in the traditional sense, like I'm a sort of civil libertarian, like old school leftist that believe in equality for everybody. I'm not, and I'm sort of I tend to be anti-war. I mean, I'm not saying there are no wars we should be involved in, but I think we should not be involved in very many of them. Certainly not as many as we are now. But I is sort of what we call the left now. I would say I don't have a lot in common with, for the most part. And I've become very skeptical of government, at least in this country.
Right.
It's just so corrupt.
Right.
We see models in other parts of the world, especially Western Europe, where sort of larger government works well, but it doesn't seem to do so in this country. So in any event, just to preface that, I don't think things would go down any differently if they happen now. I actually think a lot of it has to do with this like really poisonous political divide between the right and the left, where the two hate each other so much that everything is just about scoring points against the other team. So, and I think that's what happened in 2020. I honestly think that if former President Trump had said, you know, I think COVID is an extremely dangerous disease and we should all stay home and all the governors should issue lockdown orders, that all the Democrats would have said, wait a second, what about the poor kids? They're not going to. But it was because Trump would like equivocated, didn't seem to take it that seriously, as, you know, he's just kind of an airhead, I think. I don't think he had formulated thoughts that it was like, oh my God, of course this is the most serious thing ever and we should lock down forever. And because, you know, Donald Trump is endangering us with his, you know, not taking this seriously kind of thing. So I think the exact same thing would happen now, honestly.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because right now we are looking at that House of Representatives bill, HR 6090, which seems to have bipartisan support and actually more support by the conservative right, and is, well, you know, yesterday I said it's so obvious that this is an attack on the First Amendment. I mean, this is like this is just a mind-blowing assault on First Amendment rights and our constitutional freedoms. And it's being championed by a lot of Republicans. So it's very interesting. I mean, what are your thoughts on HR 6090?
I actually just had a piece go up on Barry Weiss's Free Press website like an hour ago. So describing that, I co-authored it with Chris Russo, who's on the right. So I quote tweeted him yesterday.
Saying, I saw that.
So Barry Weiss asked if we would co-author a piece about that. I mean, it's flagrantly unconstitutional. And actually someone just sent me the first defense of it I've seen. This is the only piece of legislation I've ever seen where every lawyer I know disagrees with it. But apparently there's one who says it's okay. And he says, well, it's not a criminal law. It's not. It essentially withholds funds from the Department of Education, withholds funds from schools that don't apply this very expansive definition of anti-Semitism when adjudicating discrimination claims. So a student says that they were discriminated against by a teacher or another student, and when the school looks at that, they apply this definition of anti-Semitism, which includes like holding the state of Israel to a higher standard than other Western democracies, like whatever that means. I think I know what they're getting at, which is often when the claim is made that, well, Israel gets criticized far more than all of these other countries. Like, why aren't you criticizing China? And why aren't you, which isn't a Western democracy, but whatever, why aren't you criticizing Boko Haram, which isn't a country either? But and I mean, the reason is, well, because we fund Israel, we give them, they get the most military aid of any country, even though they're a first world country that gives everybody health care, unlike us. And we veto all the resolutions against them at the UN. So we basically are their enabler. So when they commit human rights violations, it's our obligation to call them out. I would hope that if we were funding the China's genocide against the Uyghurs, that people would be free, and America would be free to say, wait a second, I don't want my tax money going to that. And if we were vetoing resolutions against that in the UN, that our citizens would be able to say, hang on a sec, I don't think we should be vetoing these resolutions. So that's why Israel is often, singled out for criticism. But so the claim is made that's anti-Semitic. In my opinion, that claim is often made to shut down debate so that we can't have these conversations. And so I think this is very dangerous. And yes, it's not imposing criminal penalties. This particular one is not. But by withholding funds, if that's a recognized form of First Amendment violation, the Supreme Court has said that making funding contingent in the higher education context or other contexts upon restricting speech constitutes a First Amendment violation.
Well, and not only that, we're talking about in schools, but also universities, and the Supreme Court has held that in universities is where free speech and debate should be the most robust and most protected. So great, it's not criminal, but it's still stifling and probably one of the most important critical areas of the public square. This Constitution, this is exactly where it needs to be happening. So it's disingenuous to say that, oh, it's not that big of a deal. And that's a really interesting analysis, because criminal versus at a certain point, sometimes even the financial penalty is more than, the impact on you is more than spending a couple days in jail. So that's really interesting. I'm dying that you and Chris co-authored something together, because I saw that. And her tweet, if you guys don't follow her, you guys should. She says, I don't really, you didn't say I didn't like him, but I don't really follow him. I don't really agree with him, but this is spot on, which is actually, it just goes to show, first of all, that there is some hope for humanity, because when you are being honest, you will find those people who are being honest about what's going on and what things truly mean. But number two, it gives me hope, and it just shows how brazen this is. So do you think, so again, so people know the bill is like 3 pages on a good day with like double spacing, is like 3 pages long, and it says we're going to prevent anti-Semitism, and it refers to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance or Association, IHRA's definition of anti-Semitism, which isn't defined. It's defined by several examples, one of which you just mentioned, but another one that I thought is just like it's dangerously overbroad and ambiguous. For example, demonizing Jews, especially, but not exclusively, including the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, other social societal institutions, denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination, holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. And I'm not saying that we should say these things about Jews, but the point is to have a discussion. And so do you just said you see a problem with HR 6090. Do you see, again, looking at the voting, it's only come out of the House, it's now headed over to the Senate. Do you think that the representatives understand the significance of this bill, or do they understand what the First Amendment means? Are they willfully blind? What do you think is going on here? I mean, the support is appalling.
Yeah, that was my first instinct. And I think my read of it is that they're pandering to constituents. They're trying to make a play to show they take anti-Semitism seriously. Most of them probably know that this isn't going to survive a court challenge if it passes through the Senate and the president signs it, which I think it's probably not going to. I don't think the Senate's going to pass it, although it could. I don't know. That's why I wrote the piece, because I'm trying to do what I can. But I think they're trying to pander to their constituents, say, oh, look at how seriously we take anti-Semitism. By the time it actually comes up for a court challenge, and it's going to be what, 2 years until it gets to the Supreme Court, and then everyone will have forgot about it and they won't pay a political price. So they're going to waste all our taxpayer money fighting this.
Well, yes, but at the same time, it does, people who are supporting this and it does expose or reveal people's, okay, let's just cut to this point that we talked about yesterday. It really exposes people's biases and hypocrisy, because we've spent now, at least I'll speak for us, you and I, the last 4 years fighting for the Constitution, fighting for freedom for everybody, fighting for access for everybody. I think it's really interesting. I have a similar background. I come from a family of immigrants. A lot of my pro bono work has always been about immigration, and that dovetails a lot with anti-human trafficking work. And I saw the same thing that you saw. I saw with these mandates, the communities that were being disproportionately impacted were minority and immigrant communities, many who didn't speak English. And so I thought that as a society, we saw that it's certainly now after 4 years, maybe not in the beginning, totally fine. I didn't see it in the beginning, but certainly now saw who was being impacted and saw that it was truly an us versus them mentality, them being the government. Like you said, I am on the same page with you about government, these big organized governments. But we're seeing that actually probably wasn't the case, that was the case only because of perhaps medical freedom or bodily autonomy, but it's not the case when it comes to free speech and free exercise of religion. And so, I mean, do you see that there is hope for unity again? Like where do you think we go from here when we have just such a close in time example of this hypocrisy?
I don't see a lot of hope for humanity as a general or American. It's very shocking, the hypocrisy, to be honest. Like, people who claim to be championing free speech are now advocating for shutting it down because they don't like the speech. It's pro-Palestinian speech in their mind. And what they're saying is, they're making the same old excuses. Oh, it's pro-terrorism speech. It's anti-Semitic. I'm sure there are some people saying some heinous things that fall into those categories. But from what I understand, the majority of the speech is really about Palestinian rights, not killing Palestinians who had nothing to do with what happened on October 7th. And you might not agree with the political messaging, but it certainly is constitutionally protected speech. And I think that these are excuses to shut it down, because a lot of these people want to protect Israel from any criticism. And so it's been very discouraging and disheartening to see the hypocrisy. And as one example, I will say this, I've not seen a lot of people defending this HR 6090. But for instance, there was a young woman at the University of Southern California who was the valedictorian. She's very pro-Palestine. She had written, approvingly posted something on her Instagram that calls for the abolishment of the Jewish state. So all of these people said she shouldn't be able to give the valedictorian speech because she's anti-Semitic. And I engaged in some dialogue with them, and I said, well, what makes you think she's anti-Semitic? Well, she calls for the genocide of Jews. I said, what makes you think that? Well, she's calling for the abolishment of the state of Israel. And I said, can you please point me to the exact page? I went there, and the page she had cited said, she advocates for the abolishment of the state of Israel and to be replaced with a state where Jews and Palestinians live alongside each other with equal rights. And I said, literally the sentence after that is saying where Jews and Palestinians live alongside in equal rights. So you might not agree. You might want a Jewish only state, but you're misrepresenting what she's saying. She is certainly not calling for the genocide of the Jews. And then the next defense that was made was, well, that's just a fairy tale. So what she's doing is effectively denying Jews their right to self-determination. Okay, maybe. But we should be able to have these conversations. To make this so off limits that this girl can't even give a speech when she was chosen to be the valedictorian is insane. And there have been Jewish students who've given speeches that have on their Instagram that they that, Zion belongs to the Jews and the Palestinians should get out of there. That's been going on since I was born. Probably, well, there wasn't the web before I was born, but those statements were made. I mean, that's allowed, and I would never call for that person to be canceled. I think they should have the right to say that.
Well, I think, again, it goes back to the fact that HR 6090 will have a chilling, if it does pass, and, during that time, and it's the same thing that happened with COVID, until it gets to that final ruling, how much harm will have been caused, how much destruction will be left in the aftermath after we finally win at the U.S. Supreme Court. How many, for example, like with COVID, how many jobs were lost, how many children were locked at home with their, and partners were locked at home with their abusers, how many people lost their jobs and then their homes and their businesses. And then there were so many things that happened, even though we ultimately won in the end. It's still a very dangerous law. And people also don't, or bill, excuse me, it's not a law yet, don't understand that with this kind of censorship, this will basically be state sanctioned. It will be legal government censorship of speech, comes surveillance. It's not like you're going to be like self-reporting and hope that, I'm sure that will be part of it. But of course, they will say, well, in order to, implement or enforce this bill, if it becomes law, we're going to need to surveil. And so we have, again, it's like Patriot Act 2.0, government surveillance, government censorship. It's extremely dangerous. It's ambiguous, overbroad. And again, it will have the effect of stifling debate in universities, which is exactly where we want them. We want it everywhere, to be honest with you, but particularly in universities. And the U.S. Supreme Court has said, this is the key to liberty, because the good ideas will rise to the top and the bad ideas will be fleshed out. So we need to trust the process. With that, go ahead.
And I think this kind of, a lot of people think hate speech shouldn't be protected speech. And it's a lot of people have a lot of trouble understanding why that's the case. And I think this sort of shows why, because there are people who say, saying there should be a one state for Jews and Palestinians to live equally is hate speech, because it's effectively saying the Jews don't have the right to their own state and blah, blah, blah. As I said before, we should absolutely, I'm not saying it's my position, but we should absolutely be able to have debates about whether a one-state solution or a two-state solution or whatever is the best. To call that off limits as hate speech is an extreme sort of extension of what hate speech is supposed to be. And that's why we don't have hate speech laws, because there's all this ambiguity, and because it allows people to make, these sort of far-fetched argument saying, well, this effectively means you want to call for the killing of all of this group, which is not true anyway. So, well,
no. And I actually was going to say that is that I don't think that people know that hate speech is protected. So there are, free speech is the First Amendment right to speak freely is fiercely protected by the U.S. Supreme Court. It has been, for hundreds of years or over 100 years. But hate speech in particular, and correct me if I'm wrong, again, better than this is your arena, but it calls for imminent lawless action and poses an imminent threat of harm to people. So it's only a very narrow situation in which this type of quote unquote hate speech is actionable. And that's when there's a serious threat of imminent harm or risk. Yeah. It's
basically if you say Jack, go kill Jill.
Exactly. But it's important because, like you said, hate, what is hate? It's such even a subjective term in and of itself. So then that would require the government and then later the courts to define what, and that is obviously going to change with the times, with, who's in office, who's been elected, who's been nominated. And so it's only in very, very narrow circumstances that speech where, like you said, it's basically, if they were saying, go kill XYZ, and they take, they have the capacity to, right? If I say that to you and you don't have the capacity to go actually do that, then that's still not hate speech. That's unprotected. So people actually, I don't think that people understand that. Even burning a cross on your front lawn, unless it's done with the intent to intimidate someone and again, spur action and imminent law, dangerous action, even that is protected. And the reason is, again, what we already said, it's exposing these people, exposing the lies, exposing the hatred, and then having the counter dialogue to drown that out. And that's actually what's most important.
That is, yeah. And there's something, I mean, I myself have been the recipient of quite a bit of hate speech. Like I get the nastiest emails ever,
Yeah.
misogynistic. And I mean, I've had to deal with people saying horrible things about Palestinians. My father's Palestinian, so it hurts when I see people say all Palestinians are terrorists, the kids deserve to die too. But I deal with it because I understand that that's the price I pay to live in a free society, and dealing with it is a better alternative to me than having the government be policing these kinds of things.
Right. And first it's going to be about, anti-Semitism, about Jewish people, and then it will be about something else. Right. Again, first of all, the surveillance system will already be in place, and then they'll just bootstrap, that's what we call it in the law. They'll just bootstrap additional conflicts that they happen to create. Let's be honest. The government is creating this, it's organized chaos. So then they will continue to create, whether it used to be BLM, and then they were trying to stop anyone that spoke out against BLM or what was going on there was racist and bigoted. With the COVID, people were anti-science. They were grandma killers, like you said, baby killers. And now we have the same situation. And again, I am not, and I don't believe you are either, we're not saying to be anti-Semitic. We're just saying we need to be careful. Number one, we need to pay attention and understand where the source of all this discord and fighting is coming from, and then pay attention to when the government comes in with a proposed solution. Like Ronald Reagan said, like the scariest 8 words in the English language that I've got, and I'm here to help. So you mentioned, and sorry, just really quickly, that's the same thing that happened with AB 2098 in that COVID era. The California representatives wanted to censor dangerous doctors who were giving COVID misinformation. So we need to be careful. It's either, and again, another saying that I love, if you cut out a man's tongue, you're not proving yourself right. You're proving that you are afraid with what he has to say.
And for many people on our side, who are on our side with the COVID stuff, I mean, a lot of Democrats claim that, for instance, saying that biological men shouldn't play in women's sports is hate speech. You're denying their right to exist. You're denying that they're women. And I think a lot of us would like to be able to make the point that actually there's a difference, and maybe they shouldn't be able to play in women's sports. And so once you allow for these hate speech categories, a lot of the speech you like to make might be off limits.
Well, and it's the same thing. If you deny this trans woman's right, you're basically making them suicidal and they're going to die. So you're killing them with your words. So it's a very dangerous, slippery slope, as we also like to say in the law. Another point, though, going back to the point about government surveillance, and to your case, you guys, she's in this U.S. Supreme Court, Missouri versus Biden, which is now Murphy versus Biden. She's representing several individual plaintiffs, including Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Erin Cariotti, who was here on our show last week. They love you, speak nothing but just your praises. We already have government surveillance happening. Can you tell our viewers and listeners what is actually happening right now in real time and what happened during COVID?
Yeah, you mean with respect to the censorship?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, what is going on is, and there's a lot of it, so it's hard to describe quickly, but effectively the government is heavily involved in social media censorship. So they work closely with the companies, sometimes threatening, sometimes persuading, sometimes kind of working in cooperation with the companies. And that's various agencies that go from CDC to DHS to State Department, within DHS. Yeah. The White House, the Biden White House has been very involved in this. And it's stuff like COVID misinformation, quote unquote, the 2020 election, Hunter Biden laptop story. The Biden administration has indicated that they want to censor things like, misinformation about transgenderism, which means like what we said earlier, that trans men are not biological women, or something like that. Climate misinformation. So if you think climate change isn't man-made, that would be misinformation. Economic misinformation. So essentially, they want to be able to police what people say on social media, and for their political benefit. I think there are probably some people who have like good intentions. I have a hard time like using that term, but like they actually think they're doing the right thing and protecting Americans from dangerous speech, if there's such a thing. But a lot of them, I think, are just doing it in order to shut down debate for political gain, which is the most insidious kind of censorship and the ones that the framers of the Constitution worried about the most.
Right.
So this is really like a very far-reaching enterprise. There are tons of officials and agencies involved in it, and we wouldn't really have known about it if we hadn't gotten discovery in this case.
Which is amazing, by the way, that you even got to that point. You brought up something important, an interesting point. So when the framers drafted the First Amendment and passed, for lack of a better word, the First Amendment, obviously we lived in a very different time.
Yeah.
And right now we deal with like constant just flood of actual bombardment of information on our devices, social media feeds, like just constant. We're constantly getting pinged to our cell phone, to our computer screens. And you were mentioning like good intentions and bad intentions. I mean, do you think that there's actually, maybe there are actually some people who believe like, yeah, I do believe in an individual's capacity to filter through lies and deception and, you know, fake news. But in today's day and age, that just isn't possible anymore because of what I was just describing. I mean, do you think that the First Amendment can exist in the way that it was designed to exist in today's day and age, that technological age?
That's a really excellent question. I agree. It's very hard to figure out like what's going on. And I actually felt it a lot with these protests where I hear from some people, they're so anti-Semitic, they're so violent. And then I hear from other people, they're actually totally peaceful. This, you know, one instance that was talked about of a Jewish kid who was prevented from getting to class, he was actually provoked. And the other people, I don't know. You know, I'm not there. I don't know. It's hard for me to get a grasp on how much of this is anti-Semitism, how much of it is sort of people trying to shut down the movement by using claims of anti-Semitism. And so I think part of the problem is just social media isn't necessarily the best way to get information. You know, people are very impulsive. They post things without adequate information. They just want to be the first to post it to get the views. That's sort of why we have, you know, reporters, trained journalists, and there are a lot of problems with them too. Especially the mainstream media. But for that reason, I have my go-to sources that I trust, like Matt Taibbi, Michael Schellenberger, Glenn Greenwald. Occasionally they make mistakes, but not very often. I think probably young people need to be taught in school. We need to have like courses on how to distinguish, you know, sort of true information from false information, what makes something good journalism, what makes something bad journalism. It's probably one of the most important skills you can have. And I just, you know, because I disagree so much with the government being involved in this. But on the other hand, the past several months, I've really seen how this can get out of control and harm people. I mean, there are so many people who are just posting videos that I think I later learned were taken totally out of context to say, like, you know, the protesters are violent or anti-Semitic or whatever. And if we didn't have social media and this was in a newspaper, I think the reporter would likely have done a more careful job. And so I don't know, it's a big problem.
Yeah, and we have AI, you know, issues now too, which to me is probably one of the most terrifying things that we're facing right now. I don't know if you've seen some examples of that. Like you cannot even distinguish between the real individuals. They'll have like a split screen like this, and you won't be able to tell. And they use the data points from all our social media. For example, you have given so many talks, they could probably generate an incredible AI version of you. And that's pretty terrifying. I mean, I am grateful. For example, I would recommend following Informed with Anthony Cabasa. He and Jorge Ventura, he's been at the border a lot. They are like guerrilla journalists, and they are there with the cameras, and they'll like live stream a whole thing. So they give a lot of context. And in my experience working with them, are very neutral. So anyway, that was just other source of information for you. So that lawsuit, Missouri versus Biden, Murphy versus Biden. Now, where are we in the process? And now that you know this about the government, and I mentioned surveillance because I know it's not technically in the sense that maybe you were thinking about it. But again, if the government is censoring, and we saw from the emails that you obtained during discovery, they're obviously monitoring what's going on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, all of these things. So that's what I referred to by what I was meaning by surveillance. Now that we know this, that the government is doing this, that the White House, the Biden administration was basically telling them they had to, pull accounts and post down, and that they complied. How do we respond to that as American citizens? Like, where do we go with this information?
Well, so the Supreme Court just heard the case last month, March 18th. So I just forgot it's May. We expect a decision in June. It could come out in May. We'll see. The argument was they were not as hostile to the government as I would have liked to see. It might have been because we were up there on a win, and I think they believed that the court below, the Fifth Circuit, went too far in what they were restraining. But what I'm afraid they're going to say is that it's okay for the government to work with these companies to monitor and censor speech if the companies are voluntarily engaged in it. They may say they're not able to coerce the companies, and some of that was going on, where there were like threats made. If you don't censor this vaccine misinformation, we're going to have to do something about it. Coming from the White House, that's a pretty scary. But I'm afraid they'll be able to say that the companies can work with the government. And that would be really problematic, because a lot of the censorship that was going on actually is kind of done voluntarily on the part of the companies. They're like, and another thing to note is that there's a sort of inherent power imbalance where the government has threatened the companies in the past. The companies have a lot of motivation to please the government and to be in the government's favor in order to get certain benefits and not not have consequences. So even in our actions that appear to be voluntary, I'm hesitant to sort of paint them that way. But in any event, we'll see what happens. I mean, the other thing is there's a committee, Weaponization of Government Committee, which is a subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, and they're contemplating legislation to sort of prohibit this kind of thing. I mean, the First Amendment is a floor, not a ceiling. So Congress could pass a bill saying that the government and social media companies working together is unlawful for whatever reason.
That's interesting. It's funny that not funny that you say that, but like the way that two sources, two media publications describe the case. The New York Times described the lawsuit as a First Amendment case that has challenged the government's ability to combat false and misleading narratives about the pandemic, voting rights, and other issues that spread on social media. So this case has larger implications than just COVID-19. Conversely, the Missouri Attorney General described it as the court's ruling, as preventing the violation of First Amendment rights of millions of Americans. And he added, Missouri will continue to lead the way in the fight to defend our most fundamental freedom. So it's just this play with words, but I can see what you're saying, that the Supreme, it's just a matter of framing, right? They just frame it in a certain way. What's voluntary? And like you said, who is voluntarily defying orders from the White House?
And who decides what's true and false? That's the other thing. And the government was the #1 purveyor of misinformation during COVID. Right. They said the vaccine would stop transmission. That was a lie. They knew, and they also had information that it didn't. They said masks worked. That was a lie. We all know now masks don't work. They said lockdowns would quell the spread of COVID. That was a lie. Everything was a lie. And so for them to, and I think our case illustrates beautifully, again, why we have a First Amendment, because, Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, these are top epidemiologists from Stanford and Harvard, top opining on the areas of their expertise on social media. And one of the famous quotes Kulldorff was censored for was saying that he was responding to somebody who asked whether naturally immune people and children need to get, or everyone needs to get the vaccine. And he said, no, it's very good for elderly people. Naturally immune and children don't need it. And that was censored by Twitter as misinformation. We now know that it was flagged by the Election Integrity Partnership, which was working very closely with government agencies, basically funded by them. And so it was sort of a launderer for this sort of censorship. So the government could launder their activities through these third parties. and then claim they're not involved in the censorship. But anyway, I mean, the fact that you have some, probably 22-year-old at Twitter censoring Martin Kulldorff because what he says doesn't match what the CDC says it's shocking. And it shows why we need robust debate in this country, not censorship.
I saw the congressional hearings where I can't remember what representative it was. It's a woman, and she was like, "Are you a doctor? Are you an epidemiologist?" And it's like a 22-year-old.
Yeah.
She's like, no. She's like, "How do you have the right? Like, on what's the basis for you deciding that post needs to go down?" It was pretty impressive. I am loving our conversation, but this is really stressing me out. I mean, this is, we all knew it, right? We all knew that we knew we've had our posts taken down and we couldn't follow people, or we saw it on a small scale, but to have the U.S. government double down on this, to have the emails to expose them like this, is a little bit concerning. I guess another option, in addition to when that bill hopefully comes out from the subcommittee on the weaponization of government, is that what the committee was called?
I don't know of a specific bill. I'm just saying I know that's one of the things they're contemplating.
So we should work on support our representatives if that comes out and get them to vote on it.
Bill. I mean, of course you have to be careful with these things because you don't want to give, I'm always also nervous about more regulation, but we'll
have to read it, like you said.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. We'll read it when it comes out and then we'll decide. I have did you actually, and I should have asked you this offline, but did you get to argue in the Supreme Court?
No, I didn't.
Okay. Were you there?
Yeah, I was there. Yeah.
Was it different than being in any other court?
No, I mean, you have to stand in line forever. So the arguments start at 10 and I actually had a reservation. So I just had to be there by about 9. But if you don't, if you're just a member of the Supreme Court bar and you really want to get in, if it's an important case, you have to get there at 7 in the morning and stand in line. So it's 3 hours. I did it last week for Trump's immunity case because I was just curious about it, and a friend of mine was arguing it actually. And standing in line, and I made the mistake of wearing stilettos. Standing in line for 3 hours. By the end, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, the things that you have to think about as a woman in the law. I mean, did you, just looking back on your career where you started, did you ever think that you would be where you are today with a lawsuit in front of the Supreme Court of the United States?
No.
Isn't that wild?
I had no idea.
And with that said, where do you see yourself, in the next 5 years? Do you see yourself still with the NCLA, still fighting this kind of law, or
I don't know. I've learned not to make predictions. I just follow my heart and my passion, and I say what I believe, and it kind of leads. It just that leads me places.
Have you always been that way? Have you? Sometimes, I feel like a lot of us in COVID, or for maybe I'll speak for myself. I'm an opinionated person, but I didn't always have to. I actually, when I was younger, used to say things all the time. I would just say them. I was like, oh, but it's true. Oh, but it's true. That kind of got beat out of me with a lot of feathers that I ruffled. And then I became more reserved in that regard. I still had my opinions, and where it was appropriate, I would share. But when COVID happened, and when I realized what I thought was going on, and I actually just had questions, I just started asking questions. And the more I got shut down, then I was like, I need to speak.
Yeah.
Have you always been this outspoken and principled, or okay?
I always want people to like me. It's one of my flaws. So it took me a long time to speak out about COVID. As I mentioned, I tried kind of timidly at the beginning and say hey, maybe we should think about the downsides of doing this. When I encountered sort of vitriol, I would kind of back down and be like, okay, let's not talk about this. But at some point I felt morally compelled. What was going on was so crazy. It was so harmful. I just had to do it. And the same thing happened to me sort of recently with Palestine, where I kind of more or less kept my mouth shut after October 7th, even when I saw, a lot of people in a lot of friends or former friends saying the most heinous things about Palestinians, like they all deserve to die, even the kids, because they're all terrorists anyway. And I was really, just a lot of people that I now work with are on the right. That's just sort of the nature of things. And a lot of them just support Israel no matter what. And so I was frustrated for a number of months just holding my tongue. And then at some point, I had a baby in January, and I was like looking at him. He looks, even though he's only a quarter Palestinian, my husband is not Palestinian at all, but he looks quite Arab. He got like my complexion and everything. And I just was like, these are the kids, like there are so many kids that look like this, just being blown to pieces or starved to pieces or have to starve to death or having to suffer amputations without anesthesia. I mean, it's unspeakably terrible. Which is not to say what happened on October 7th wasn't terrible. What happened on October 7th was appalling. I do not support it. I do not support Hamas. I want to be very clear about that. I also don't think that, I think this is Israel's reaction is clearly revenge. It crosses way over the line of like self-defense. And you cannot use a civilian population to get revenge on your enemy or, make a political point to your constituents. That's just totally immoral and violative of international law. So anyway, I was sort of looking at my son and thinking, you know what? I don't want to have to tell him in 20 years that I didn't speak up because I didn't want to lose my job, or I didn't want to lose Twitter followers, or I didn't want to, I didn't want to lose out on professional opportunities because I was afraid of offending people when something so horrible is happening. And so I just decided I went on Twitter and I basically said, I'm done staying silent. This is my story. I gave a little bit of background that, I'd watched my dad be really tormented by not being able to speak up on the subject because he was afraid of the repercussions, and I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. And now the gloves are off, and they've been off for like a month. So
how does it feel? Probably liberating.
I'm happy I did it. A lot of the things I was afraid of didn't happen. I lost some followers. Some people called me an anti-Semite, which I expected, which is ridiculous. But
right.
I'm sure that there are professional opportunities I lost that I'll never know about, like people who just don't want to work with me or whatever. But I also got some. You win some, you lose some. That's kind of other people have reached out to me and said they're really happy. Like Barry Weiss asked me to write the piece with Chris Rufo. That was an opportunity that wouldn't have come up if I hadn't been tweeting about this. So I figure I try to be genuine and honest and stick up for what I believe is right, and also not fight battles that aren't worth fighting.
Right. Well, and at the end of the day, you go to bed. There's like a saying in Spanish that's going to sound really weird to translate, that you go to bed with yourself. So you have to, sleep with yourself at night. And like you said, your child, you have to be true to who you are. And when you're being true to who you are and you're pursuing and protecting your values and your principles, and the people who are aligned with you will see that and they will be attracted to you. And it's the same thing that happened with COVID. Yeah. You would ask, same with BLM, you would ask questions, you would get branded and marginalized and canceled. And then the people who were on the same page, who thought like you, came. And I think we've all upgraded, for lack of a better word, just whether for better or worse, whatever side of those issues you fell on, you upgraded in the sense that you are now surrounded by people who think and are more aligned with you, whatever that may be. So kind of in this vein, what do you, looking at your son, looking at your work, looking at everything, what do you want your legacy to be?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't thought of it very much. I want to be someone who always stood up for what I believed was right. I would say that's pretty much it.
That's a good legacy to have and a good aspiration to have. And before we go, I want to ask two questions. One, have you ever considered running for office? I'm sure people approach you all the time.
Not really. I hate politics.
I know.
I
don't think we could do it.
Yeah, I don't have the stomach for it. I'm not a liar. So
you're a lawyer, not a liar. Remember that funny joke that people like to tell us all the time. Yeah. Part of me is like, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to fix it. And I'm going to kick the bad people out, and I'm going to pass all this legislation. But now, having worked the last 4 or 5 years in that, and then consulting at the Capitol and giving expert testimony and all that stuff, I'm like, oh, they don't they don't care. And actually the good bills don't even get hearings. So I'm not discouraging everybody. What I'm trying to say is, again, being private citizens, we have so much power, so much authority. It actually all resides in us. And we have the absolute right to control the instrumentalities of our creation. So get involved in local politics, and that will trickle up, and just support the good actors, the good bills, and the good lawyers and their lawsuits. One more thing before we go, two more things before we go. I want to play a game with you, but before we do, where can people support you and your lawsuits and your work?
So the website is nclalegal.org. We survive based on donations, so we can, we bring cases, and our capacity to do so depends on donors. So if you support our cause, that's a great place to start. I also am on Twitter at Jenin Younes Esquire, JeninYounesEsq.
I'm laughing because I have on JD and Pearson, Nicole Pearson, JD. And so when I post things that people don't like, they're like, oh, you have a JD at the end of your handle. I'm like, yeah. Like that doesn't mean that my eyeballs don't work. Like you don't need a JD for your two eyeballs to work and for you to be honest about what happened. Okay. Okay. So nclalegal.org.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Everybody go there. We'll post that in the comments and in the caption here. So we're going to play a game. It's called Patriot, Traitor, Pass. So I'm going to give you names if you agree. I'd sign a waiver. If you let me know if you think this individual is a patriot or a traitor, or if you want to pass. Okay.
Okay. You're freezing a little bit. So
I am. Okay.
Yeah.
That's because it's fun. So they want to get, they're censoring us. Justice John Roberts, patriot, traitor, or pass?
I'll pass.
Okay.
I don't have strong feelings about it.
That's fair. What about Clarence Thomas?
Patriot.
I know what you're thinking. I know where your brain just went. Ginsburg.
I'd say patriot. I think she had good intentions.
Right.
I don't agree with a lot of her interpretations of the law, but.
And just so everybody knows, she's a lawyer. I'm a lawyer. So all of her answers, she's qualifying in her head with clauses, with little subclauses. So that's why this is a very hard game for us. What about Brett Kavanaugh?
I mean, I'll take a pass on that one. I
don't have feelings either way on that one, even though people are going to probably destroy me in the comments because they have feelings. But I don't have any yet.
I've been disappointed at his failure to put checks on the government. So that's my caveat. It has nothing to do with the sexual assault allegations.
No. I'm the same as you. Amy Coney Barrett.
I like her. I'll say patriot.
Okay. Russell Brand.
Ugh.
He's British, so I don't even know if it counts. Can you be a patriot for the U.S.?
Yeah, I don't think he can really be either, but I do not like him. I'll call him a traitor.
Okay. And then Speaker Mike Johnson.
You froze. Did you say Sotomayor?
No, but let's do that one. Sotomayor.
Oh, Sotomayor. I would say traitor.
And I actually said, I know. I know, so bad. That her ruling, we'll have another discussion about this. I actually said Speaker Mike Johnson.
Oh, Johnson, traitor.
Yeah. Traitor. Okay, well, you're 10 out of 10. Oh, no. What about Ketanji Brown Jackson?
Yeah. I don't like to, I'm going to take a pass on her. I did not like her at the recent argument, but I'm
just realizing you still have a ruling that's pending. So maybe
I assume the justices won't watch this.
You would be surprised. Well, on that note, I just thank you for your work. Thank you for your fearlessness and for your honesty and integrity. I just want you to know that watched you for a very long time. I respect you and your work. And I'm in there in the trenches with you. If you ever need any help from the West Coast, I'm your lady, your woman. Before we go, is there anything that you want to say to listeners and viewers, just as a last final note?
No, I think I'll leave it there. We covered a lot of ground, but thank you so much for having me. It was lovely to speak to you, and hope to be in touch.
Absolutely. I will talk to you soon. Thanks,
Yeah.
Jenin.
Thank you.
Bye.